Shipping and Romance Writing panel. My name is Will Player, and we're here to talk about how to write romance without having notices. We're here to offer tips and advice on writing romance stories that are believable and well written and don't fall into some of the traps that a lot of shipping stories are notorious for falling into.
How to ship ponies without being shipping.
Right.
That is all we're here to do. Please ignore the love collectors on the ceiling.
So up here with me today, we'll let my panelists introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm the Titanium Dragon. Some of you may know me from my reviews of everything on film fiction and hating 90% of it.
I'm still waiting.
Before I started doing reviews, I actually started out as a shipper. Probably one of my most popular stories is Forever and Again, which was shamelessly ripped off from Lyronis' story. No, I'm just kidding. But it was a story about Twilight and Celestia and the concepts of living forever and reincarnation. But I've written a number of other stories, Missile Trapped, and Krebs, The Stolen Date. I really enjoy romance and shipping.
What's your OTP?
Oh, Rarajack. See, we're actually measuring how much people like these ships by the amount of applause, so be sure to clap really loud.
Yeah, I'm not going to do that. All right, I am Aquaman. Some of you may know me from the duties I pull with Quest Daily, among which are con coverage here, some episode follow-ups, things of that general nature. On fanfiction, I'm also semi-prolific, or I was briefly for a time. It was fun. I should try it again sometimes. In terms of romance stories, I'm probably best known for Far From the Tree, which was the second place finisher in, I believe, the Most Dangerous Game contest, the first incarnation of it. I've also dabbled in it a couple other times with Button Mash, and I guess I can technically count as a game for this stallion that gave you Unicorn or Horn Jump, which was slightly romantic in a way.
As I said before, I'm Will Player. I am admin of the Apple Dash and Twijack groups, and I most recently wrote Lost Time, which won the Apple Dash, the most recent Apple Dash contest.
I am Horizon, and when I'm not reviewing stories for the Royal Canterlot Library, I write other things, including ships, which include Thou Goddess, in which a pony sleep writes poetry to Princess Luna, and Fugue State, in which Lyra and Bon Bon try to not let musical numbers destroy their relationship. As you can tell, I'm a bit of the weird shipper of the crowd.
I am Midnight Dancer.
Well, we know where your royalties lie.
Some of you know me from my soap, apparently, and some of you know me from the stories I write on FimFiction. The most popular of which recently has been Blankets, which I wrote 3 years ago, but there it is. And I've also written a few other things, like Twilight Luna, I've written a Rarajack. I write a whole bunch of different ships, but Rarajack is my OTP. So I'm with you on that one.
I'm Captain Chrysalid. I'm most well known for Best Night Ever and Platinum Crown. I've also written my fair share of more crackfic type shipping, Arrow is Dreaming, and of course Twilight Sparkle Shipfic folder, the story. So I have no one true pairing, to tell the truth. I mostly use pairing as a utility within a broader story. So I'm here for pure shipping. How does it work? Is there an advanced reader goal?
Well, that is a
I'm
good.
the unromantic one on the panel.
Well, that leads us into our first topic of discussion, which is why do people ship and why do they ship ponies? So you kind of answered that one for your.
Well, I'll take
Okay.
I'll very quickly the dry version. I know lots of other authors ship them mostly because it advances story elements that you otherwise want to tell. I'll admit, aside from the crack fics, I've never written a shipping fic for the purpose of shipping alone. Usually the characters will get closer or they'll have romantic feelings, but they'll have romantic feelings within a broader context of a larger conflict or a larger conflict, regardless of what that conflict may be. I've certainly read my fair share of shipping for shipping. And I think the reason people ship is just because they enjoy it. They like the idea of any two characters, even if it's characters who've never canonically met, getting together, mashing lips, doing other stuff that's lots of fun. We also like the idea of characters that have never interacted actually interacting, or interacting in ways that we haven't seen. Rarity Jack, which is super popular and I can understand why, is a perfect example of this because Rarity and Applejack interact on so many levels, of which we only see a few in the actual show.
Okay. I think that people generally ship ponies or they ship, in the Doctor Who fandom or they ship in pretty much any fandom. Number one for the reasons that Captain Crystal had outlined, which is, basically it's fun to be like, now kiss, And I think part of it, especially for me when I'm coming to, shipping and things like that, it's because part of it is, what is your ideal relationship and which two characters can you write it out in? And then part of it is, maybe sometimes you write about stuff that has happened and you just pick two characters to basically act out something that has happened in your life that you have experience with. And I know that a lot of writers do find that very therapeutic to work through their issues by writing out shipping.
And I think I would add to that one reason I think a lot of people ship is for the same reason that we write fanfic in general, is that romance is an integral part of our lives as human beings, and yet it is something that the show only really covers peripherally. And so I think in a lot of ways there's that urge to sort of feel like we're telling the rest of the story and complete the My Little Pony experience that we know that Hasbro is never going to put up on screen.
I agree with that. I think that the characters on the show are extremely well-rounded in what we see of them, but then, they're clearly adults, whatever that means, Equestria, however you want to put them, but we don't get to see some of the more grown-ups relationships that they, develop because it's the target audience of the show. So that creates a situation where fanfic writers need to fill in the blanks.
It's probably a testament to the depth of the characters themselves and the variety of characters that we have that shipping has become so popular, particularly in this fandom. It's kind of endemic of any fandom or any group sort of centered around a show or a canon or what have you that likes to bring a lot of shipping into the picture. They're bridging those gaps that aren't necessarily covered by the source material, and they're doing something that is, in a way, kind of the only unique thing that can be done with these characters. There's only so much you can go put them in new situations and challenge them in new ways. It's the most fundamental and yet often not covered challenge you can put someone through is to either make them fall in love or see how they react if they are with one character versus another. So there's a lot of experimentation, I think, that goes into it, and there's a lot of quality in the design of the characters in and of themselves that plays into whether it happens at all.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with the relationships between the characters. It can change both the characters. You're adding a new dimension to their behavior, to their relationships. You can add a new layer of conflict to a story, or you can tell different stories. You can twist stories around that might seem normal or ordinary, and by adding an additional dimension to them, you can add in a new layer of conflict, a new layer of competing interests.
Mostly it's just fun.
Yeah, I mean,
That's what we're trying to say.
It's something to write about.
well, I mean, everybody wants to, see cute ponies do things.
Right.
Yeah.
But
I think we're
syllogism,
going
basically.
I think we're going to talk predominantly about making good shipping choices.
Oh.
But I think there's something to be said for anything that people enjoy, even if it breaks the rules or if it's shallow or it's just silly. Silliness has a certain value on its own, as anyone who's cosplayed as Pinkie Pie must know.
Well, and speaking of silliness, we're writing about cartoon ponies. I mean, there's a certain level of silliness to that, to begin with. And, trust me, I take my stories as seriously as anyone. But sometimes you step back and you're like, I just wrote a really deep scene about an orange pony telling a blue pony how they feel about each other. And but that brings up the next point of what about My Little Pony shipping tends to look different from other fandoms or other romance story writing.
Well, one thing, orange pony and blue pony are girls.
Yeah, Fats learned the secret years ago. It has it on his user page, Any story can be made better with lesbians. But, I mean, the thing is that because all the characters are female, it does, have that dimension, but, in the fandom and really in the show, there's not much of a place for that sort of prejudices that we see in real life, or saw to a greater or lesser extent in real life. It's been getting quite a bit better, and it's making some of our older stories coming out seem a little bit quaint, given the progress of gay marriage in this country. But, shipping in the fandom is a little bit different from a lot of other fandoms because none of the ships we ship are probably ever going to become canon unless Hasbro loses their minds.
Season 7's going off the rails.
So one of the things about the fandom is even though we'll make jokes about, Rare Jack and Apple Dash and how we're really competing, there's not as much in the way of naval warfare. We all know that our ships aren't really going to become canon. And so when we do it, it's for fun. We all recognize that everyone else's ship is that way too.
And I brought this up, I think, at last year's panel too, but there is something worth, I think, looking at and studying, or at least thinking about. The fact that there are so many same-sex pairings in fandom shipping in general. It's not just this show. It's essentially any fandom that you look at. The fact that it's mostly female-female pairings in this fandom is kind of a lack of options more than any particular focus on that kind of thing happening here. I'm sure if the show was mostly male characters, there'd be a lot of male-male ships too. But that kind of, I guess, I don't want to call it alternative relationships because, like TV kind of wisely said, it's becoming a lot more accepted, I would say rightfully so, in our society at this point. But it's still something that isn't represented a lot in media. There are a few gay couples, a few lesbian couples that you can see in TV shows and movies. They're starting to become something that you see occasionally as opposed to something you see never. But it's still not, by any means, the most common choice. And so it's still something that is easy for us as fandom people, as people who, I would say for the better, but however you feel about it, exist on the fringe of, in air quotes, normal society. We're the kind of people who are going to embrace these kind of things, the alternative stuff that isn't just straight on, until morning, third star from left. It's going to be something that goes a little bit left to center, whether that's just a little bit left center, which is what most of us look at, or whether it's something crazy, like she said, orange pony and blue pony, which is ridiculous, by the way. I can see that.
Orange and blue cancel each other out, so they're sure both fanny.
I don't think that's how colors work. for me to just slip in that I have a book coming out in August, and
We're now 15 minutes in.
and it has lesbians. It's called Peer Side. I have flyers I'll give people after the panel. But back to the topic at hand. But yes, I actually went with a small press when I submitted it because it's, you don't see a lot of representation of that type of relationships in the mainstream media, and Fandom is a place where you can tell, I mean, the fact that anyone can publish almost any fan fiction means that people can tell any type of stories without the gatekeepers that you have in trying to get it on a TV show or in a book published by a larger publisher.
And it's not necessarily that those people are trying to oppress anything. It's more that they're beholden to people. They're beholden to stockholders, people who are their bosses who are trying to make money off art, not even cynically. It's just their job. It's what they're supposed to do.
Exactly. They have their whole priority. Their priority is to make money and, of course, to defend copyright. The annoying Hasbro don't like to do it, but they have to do it. And if they didn't do it, then I would certainly expect their shareholders to be quite upset. So, and that's also, I guess, another reason why we don't see too many of homosexual parents in the mainstream media is simply because they're probably less profitable. And if the choice is between more profitable and less profitable and artistic, almost always more profitable would win for writers.
It's really going to depend upon the genre and upon the target audience. I mean, obviously, when you're looking at My Little Pony that is targeted towards 6-year-old girls, of which I see none here.
Well, just call us all out.
I see none. You should all be ashamed of yourselves. Anyway, I'm joking. I love most of you. But the point is that when they're targeting to 6-year-old children, they're also not just packaging and selling to 6-year-old children. They're also not just packaging and selling to us. They are selling to be parents. They are selling to be book players and the midnight dancers. Those of us that have small children that watch the show, because anyone with small children will tell you, you sit and you watch at least a couple episodes of a show that they're watching with them to make sure that it's instilling the type of value and the type of thing that you want. And unfortunately, for better or for worse, in my personal opinion, I think it's unfortunate, a lot of parents nowadays, even parents that are my age, in their 30s, they still hold these views that homosexual relationships are not something for the children. That's not something children should be exposed to, and I don't agree with that. But it's probably a large portion of, like Crystal was saying, why the shareholders are like, yeah, no, let's just not do that. Whereas in shows like Orange is the New Black, for example, I mean, it is nothing but lesbian ships, for obvious reasons, aside from maybe one or two. But it works better there, and they make the money they need to make because of the target audience that they're selling to.
And just a slight comment to that, because I did hear someone mention Steven Universe to the audience. That is kind of in that, and it is a good show. I haven't seen a whole lot of it, but I've seen enough to know that it is something that's definitely more progressive than the average cartoon. But it is existing in that kind of space that Adventure Time, I could really generously put Gravity Falls in there. I could really, really generously put FIM in there. It's this genre of cartoons that are cognizantly focused at adults. They're not just kid shows. They're focusing on an audience that is including people like us. And that's not just the book dancers, I just said the book dancers and the midnight players. Which would be a great name for a band.
Or a ship.
The whoever's and the whatsits. It's for everybody. And so there is a genre that's very slowly growing here, but we're still in the stage where it's very slowly growing.
So to be fair to MLP, one of the things that I appreciated about it as the mother of a young daughter is the lack of focus on any kind of romance. I mean, there's very little of it in the show, especially as compared to the other big option for little girls, which is Disney Princesses, which has a ton of romance.
Marry a stranger, and all your dreams will come true.
More or less a self boy.
But anyway.
We can segue now. Into,
Yes.
well, let's say that the show did do that, that for whatever godforsaken reason, Orange Pony and Blue Pony were to kiss on the show, and it would be canon. What would make a good romance story in our collective opinion? We just trust him because we're open.
You are talking about noteworthy and Black century, right?
You just keep telling yourself that.
Why don't you start your eyes and be quiet?
When we're talking about what makes a good ship, the first thing that comes into my mind, and you have to understand that I'm coming at this from a little bit more jaded angle because I read a lot of romances, and I don't go to the romances that are already my favorite. I think a big element that goes into that, if you want to write a good ship, is to realize that you do have an audience that is not a fan of your ship going in, and you need to show us what's great about it. That one of the big elements there is that you already, love these characters. That's why you're writing about them. You need to show us what goes into making that pair work and where that chemistry comes from.
There's a little bit, you could summarize it a little bit too bluntly as assume the audience knows nothing. It's generally a pretty good rule for any kind of writing where you have to assume that anybody going into your story is not in your head. They don't know all the background details of why things are the way they are. You get a little bit of leeway with that in fan fiction because they actually do know the basic details. They do know which characters you're talking about. You don't have to go through like 2 pages of explaining who Kinky Pie is and why she might be, waking up in bed next to Twilight. Although you would need to explain that a lot because that's also ridiculous. We'll take questions and angry comments later.
Let me say, I think those are both sage advice, especially, in fact, they're concrete advice if you're dealing with original characters. But practically speaking, from my own experience, I think a lot of people search for the ship that they want. And they'll search for taglines in stories. Most stories, for example, will have a blurb, and then the blurb will then be followed by the types of ships that are included in the story, either as rarity or as Applejack/rarity or wherever. But people will come to many fics, frankly, looking for the ship to happen and expecting the ship to happen. And I can only imagine they would be very pissed off if it never happened.
Well, one of the interesting things is even if somebody is already invested in the ship, you can make anything good or bad. You can ship any 2 characters if you have a proper understanding of why they should be together as people. But if you don't have an understanding of that, or you don't present an understanding of it in the story, it feels real to people. It gives the feeling of person. Very simplistic.
It brings up the question of why should 2 characters, any given 2 characters in a wheel, be put together? Well, I'll answer my own question briefly. Generally, I think the best ships are the ones where can these 2 people hold a conversation just by themselves for 20 minutes?
I've always said that one of my most important tips for writing a romance story is to include a conversation about stuff. And that stuff is anything the characters would talk about that isn't the plot. So, it's not just the characters talking about, what they're going to do about, where they're going to go on their date. It's the characters talking about, what they heard that Celestia did last weekend, or what they, assuming that one of your characters is not Celestia, or who it is. But,
White Horse will call it.
yes. What your characters gossiping together, talking about shared interests, talking about random thoughts that they had. And if you can show 2 characters having that conversation in a way that makes people comfortable, that makes people feel like this is something that they would in some way want to be part of or want to see supported, then that's going to be what hooks them into your fic and makes them want to, follow the fic and see how everything comes out.
I would call the primary difference between shipping and romance. I would call them two similar but different concepts. Shipping can be kind of short and sweet. It can be a couple thousand words just describing a moment in an already pre-existing relationship. There's still internal justification there. There's still some manner of chemistry and cohesion that these characters have. But there's no necessity that there has to be a plot. I think a romance is a story. It's got a multi-act structure. It's got some kind of conflict that gets in the way of this relationship, or starts it or ends it or whatever. But it's that extension into it. It's a little bit deeper, and it would involve some of the things that LeClaire's talking about. It's going to be conversations that aren't about the romance, or aren't about anything that has anything to do with it. It's anything that is going to build them both as characters and make them people that not only you care about in the context of the relationship, but you care about in the context of them outside of the relationship as two individuals of their own.
And I think what goes into that is that when you do that, when you show two characters outside of just saying, oh, Ember, you're so cute, oh, Sunset Shimmer, you're so smart, then... Somebody write that story, by the way, please. But when you show them interacting in a way that's not about how much they love each other, it's actually paradoxically more intimate. You are inviting your reader into those moments that make them really come together.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, because part of the reason why I like Rare Jack so much is because Rarity and Applejack are basically each other's foils. Like, just in the literary sense, they're each other's foils, and they're just diametrically opposed in so many ways. But I think it could work because they are both empathetic enough to care about what the other pony cares about. You know, like maybe Rarity can't exactly put herself in Applejack's horseshoes all the time with all the farm and her family and everything else, but she can empathize and she can know this is important to you, and so it's important to me, even if I don't fully understand it, even if it's not my life. You know, you've invited me into that part of your life, like you were saying, and you know, that's, I think, part of what makes a good romance, not just, you know, gazing into each other's eyes for X amount of minutes and then let's get married, you know.
Well, see, that's one of the reasons that I'm not a fan of Rare Jack, is because I have trouble imagining what exactly they sit and talk about. Like if they both come home and they sit down and have dinner, and what do they talk about? They're not going
all day.
But anyway, I'm just using that as an example that any ship to me is about what the characters sit down at dinner and talk about. You know, and if that seems...
But we had a joke about their account books, and that's what they talk about. But I think that would be a legitimate conversation that Applejack and Rarity, you know, bereft of...
Rarity can dig up money in the ground.
Yeah.
Just
thank you all for coming to the official Rare Jack there.
They both have their own work ethic. And they're not the same work ethic, and they're not the same businesses. And frankly, I think Applejack looks down a little bit on Rarity's business, as much as she's willing to help out. And we all know, you know, Rarity certainly looks down on anything that involves dirt, even though she's more than willing to help out and get dirty. So, I mean, I don't ship them. I have never, I've maybe teased at it in one fic, but I don't ship them, but I can definitely see why they're being shipped.
Oh, I can see
why
what
it's popular, yeah.
Well, one thing that I think that Rare Jack is excellent for, and that there are, you know, other ships that I'm not a fan of, but are very good for, is that, you know, conflict is central to a story, and characters who are foils have an automatic conflict with one another. That doesn't necessarily help convince me that they're in love, but it does tell me that this is probably going to be a good story, that it's probably going, you know, that something's going to happen, because it's hard to write a scene with Applejack and Rarity where they don't have a conflict, which is a problem in a lot of shipping fics where authors are in love with their ship, and so they forget that, you know, their characters, you know, probably should face some kind of conflict and overcome it. Now that doesn't necessarily have to be conflict that conflict with each other. It can be an external conflict like being kidnapped by changelings. Don't do it. Or it can be a conflict with it that only one of them is having, like if one of them is going through a difficult time in their life and that's affecting the way that they interact. Foils. Oh, that's tough.
Hello, this is Bruce.
Foils do have that automatic conflict that's easy, that's a quick and easy thing to control.
Well, actually,
This-
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
This is one of the reasons why they say that opposites attract, is actually that foils attract. The reason that foils are so good is because they complement each other. When we talk about opposites, we're not really talking about total opposites, but we're often talking about either different sides of the same coin or the same side of similar coins. Rarity and Applejack are one example, but Applejack and Rainbow Dash are another, and Rarity and Rainbow Dash are another example. In fact, one of the major strengths of the show is how many of the characters can serve as foils to each other. You have Twilight, who is very thoughtful, and you have Rainbow Dash, who's impulsive. But they both are at the top of their fields. They both are really amazing ponies at what they do. They both put a lot of work into what they do. And so they can appreciate each other in certain ways, but also differ with each other in certain ways. And because they can both appreciate and differ at the same time, you can create a lot of conflicts and also a lot of ways for them to come together as a pair.
I actually think one of the greatest challenges for people doing inter-main six shipping is the fact that so many of the main six have already seen the conflicts that they have with one another, and they're friends because of it. So it's not like strangers meeting one another and discovering their conflicts to begin with. Rarity already knows that Applejack, is an obsessive farmer, and Applejack already knows that Rarity's OCD about, fabric. So their conflicts are already there. So basically what you're taking is characters that are already well established as friends and trying to make the transition from that friendship to a more intimate relationship. This happens, of course, often enough in real life, but it's rarer or it's more challenging when you're talking about people who have been friends for like 4 years, and then all of a sudden they're like, let's be more than friends. With Fluttershy and me.
Way worse.
Oh, that could be possible too. I mean, it's true, like I said, of all the main six, because at this point, all the main six have known each other for years. Years have passed. Well, I guess they never really get older, but years have basically passed in the story. They've been through a tremendous amount of adventures. They know each other's foibles. So this is an added challenge, I think, like I said, to any inter-main six shipping, and let's face facts, that's the most popular shipping, is you have to kind of overcome the fact that they should know, if two characters have a fight about something, and you read it and you're like, you should kind of have seen that coming in RD.
I've been with my husband for 14 years now, and we still have fights about stuff. I mean, there's a certain amount that you're just going, even if you know someone really well, then, there's still a certain amount that you are never really going to. Actually, it's more often that you know that there's going to be a fight, and you're going to have it.
Yeah, you know a lot about them, and you know them really well. I'm sorry to cut you off there. You know a lot about them, you know them really well, and you might know all these things about them. It doesn't necessarily mean you like all these things about them. I mean, maybe they're argumentative about silly things, or maybe like first thing in the morning, you just really don't need to be anywhere near them. It really depends, and like.
Well, the question is, again, it's like the blood-brain barrier. If you have like the friendship-romance barrier, what edges one into the other? And because they're pre-existing relationships,
Right.
more what I mean. Because you're dealing with characters with pre-existing relationships, unless it's that, hot sunset shimmer amber pick that I hear is coming. you know, you have to kind of work with the existing relationships and then say, well, why are they, you know, now, after so much time, why did that change? What's moving things along?
There's basically a very central logic that all of this is dancing around. It's essentially a summification of all of it, which is not a word, but we'll roll with it. It's effectively that love is messy. It's not something that is, you know, the perfect Disney, I've met you today, we'll be wed in the morning. You know, this flawless ideal of what a romantic relationship should be. It's not two perfect people having perfect lives together. It's two imperfect people trying to do the best they can to be something that's greater than the sum of its parts. That's really what the ideal romance is. It's not something that's always portrayed as such in media, which is a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy because it leads to more people thinking of it that way in real life and then portraying it that way in media and so on and so forth. But if you're going to write a really lasting relationship in any kind of fiction, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be something where, you know, we talked about all the reasons that Rare Jack wouldn't work. Maybe they don't have anything to talk about, and that's an issue they have to work through. Maybe one of them can't stand that the other snores, and for my own amusement, I'll assume it's a parody that goes off like a chainsaw. Whoever it is, and think you're welcome for the mental image. Whatever the situation is, the gist of a working relationship is that they're willing to work through it together, and they're willing to help the other be a better person, and that's mutual and it's lasting.
It's interesting too because one of the central themes of Friendship is Magic itself is characters coming to kind of understand each other and appreciate each other and sort of understand each other's flaws. I mean, when we look at something like, you know, Suited for Success, where Rarity makes a bunch of dresses for her friends, and, you know, her friends are ungrateful. At the end of that episode, it had both Rarity kind of realizing that she had, you know, gone too far and going and trying to agree to, you know, make her friends happy at the cost of her own happiness, and everyone else kind of realizing that they had done the same thing to Rarity, that they had, you know, they would disregarded her feelings and expertise in favor of getting their own way. And a lot of the show ultimately is to some extent about mutualism. And it's interesting in that regard because relationships are often about mutualism as well, kind of coming to appreciate each other and being willing to overlook for each other's flaws or you know, even compensate for each other's flaws and still love each other.
We've gone over a lot of the reasons of how romance can work. It's just means that it's sloppy and who knows how it's supposed to work. But there are a couple specific things we can go over in terms of how to write a romance that are ways that it can go wrong. And this is things that you can fix on your end, not things that Orange Horse and White Horse have to work out on their own time. So the first and biggest one that I think gets brought up a lot is predictability. And that's also fairly straightforward, is that if you put the romance tag in a story, you put two characters tagged in there, the inherent assumption is that they're going to end up together at the end of the story if they're not already together at the start. And if it is a real romance story, that assumption isn't incorrect. They are going to be together. That's going to be the end of the story. So where does the entertainment come from? It's an old kind of trite saying, but it absolutely applies here. The journey is more important than the destination. The goal of the story is not that they kiss. You know, that's not the emotional climax. The emotional climax is the part that has the most emotion in it. It's the part where these two characters, who are kissing probably, or, you know, whatever ponies do when they like each other. They do the little nose rub thing. They're doing whatever because they've achieved this functional understanding, or at the very least, if you're going for a tragic ending, dramatic resolution to the relationship building process. And a process is what it is. It's not, you know, that 2,000-word shipping story where they are already together and we're just kind of enjoying this fluffy little moment. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's not what a romance story is. The romance story is the process by which that happens.
Another thought on the predictability problem, you know, is that it absolutely is the journey, but there are things that you can do to keep the story otherwise fresh. Like I noticed that it's popular a lot to combine the romance tag with other tags, adventure or or mystery or what have you.
Random, which is terrifying.
Yeah. But you know, if you can, but combining the story with a either subplot or as a subplot of a larger plot lets you use that non-romance plot as something that's less predictable, but still plays, plays into the romance aspect and lets them react to that.
I've always been very fond, personally, of the action-adventure romance mix, because I suppose maybe one of the easier things to do when you're writing a romance is you need that external factor to kind of break the equilibrium between two characters, and kind of foisting an adventure on them is an excellent opportunity to, again, break or upset that equilibrium that can then reforge into something more of a relationship. And not to mention my stuff, but one of my favorites is by an excellent author, Pony Dora, who wrote Flight of the Alicorn. And it's basically a Blue Blood Rarity fic, and they would have nothing to do with each other after the gala and assorted businesses, if not for the fact that they were essentially forced to kind of work together to survive this adventure. And this is what I mean by breaking or upsetting the equilibrium, and it opens up lots of possibilities. This is again why I favor mixing romance or shipping with something else, some outside force.
Speaking of outside forces, that's another thing that sometimes comes up in a negative context in a shipping story, and the best way I've ever heard it phrased is by another author on fanfic by the name of Chuck Finley, who calls it alien shipping syndrome. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, I'm actually going to quote what he says because, as I did last year, I love the way he phrases it. Alien shipping syndrome is a malady in romances where chemistry does not occur through shared interests, personal magnetism, or personality traits, but is instead instilled by parasitic brainworms. And so this, basically what's symptomatic of this is a character going moony-eyed. It's, Rainbow Dash looking down at Twilight and all of a sudden realize, wait a minute, I'm getting caught under the collar and I'm having this perfect mental image of us sitting on a moonlit hill together, touching our necks together and talking about, true love.
And wonderful.
But what does it mean?
I mean, obviously. That's what they would talk about in their relationship. We've established that.
And that sort of ties back in with what we were saying earlier about the ways that you don't want to just assume that the characters are getting together, and part of that is that you're building this engagement, you're building that sense of that journey rather than the destination from what it is that is drawing these two characters together. And if you just say, you're getting together now, kiss, then you're basically skipping your story.
Yeah, just blush, 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 giggle, giggle. It's not really a very engaging story, and it doesn't really tell us why these two characters should be together. If you're looking at somebody and all you can do is blush and you don't know why you're thinking about them, and you don't know why you're doing this, and you don't know why you're doing that. You don't need the attentions of your beloved that you don't know is your beloved. You need a medical professional because there's something wrong.
And let me clarify something real quick. We're making it sound like, the whole moony-eyed thing is something that should never come up in the story. And I'm sort of responsible for that because I'm the one who brought up the whole alien shipping syndrome thing in the first place. The biggest problem that comes up when that thing happens to a character, particularly in this canon, is that I'll go back to my example of Blue Horse and Purple Horse, they've known each other for years. However many years it is, we have no idea. Time of the show is a mix of, just guesswork and complete fabrication. I don't know, is that a show reference? I've never heard that before. But if you're putting them together and they're suddenly going moony at each other, it doesn't make sense. They're established characters. There is such a position you get in life, we probably all went through it when we were teenagers at the very least, where love, as we called it then, is that ball of, sweaty palms and blushing faces and all that kind of stuff. And I think the big mistake that people make with a lot of romance stories is they type that as love. And it is something else. It's something that's not invalid in its own right, but what it really is lust. And lust is a feeling, love is a commitment. There's a really fundamental difference between the two. And they both have a role in these kind of stories. They're both there. Ideally, in a perfect relationship, there's going to be a presence from both. But when you write a romance story, and if it's written with a focus on the lust part, and there's no love part, there's no romantic attachment, there's no relationship, it feels hollow. That's because inherently it is. Hollowness is not a bad thing. It's not something that is inherently wrong or bad, but it's not romance. And that's the biggest issue that people run into when they're writing these stories, is that depending on what you're going for, you're missing the mark if all you have in there is lust, if all you have in there is the alien shipping syndrome, where these characters who have been friends already for a great period of time are suddenly making this transition without any evidence as to why it's happening.
Actually, I've read good stories where the interaction with the characters is not romantic at all, but they do, have a very strong physical attraction for each other. It's a good, no one wants to blush case, but kiss slap can be lots of fun.
Yeah, again, there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely a lot of relationships that function very well doing exactly that and nothing else. But when we talk very specifically about romance, and this is a very specifically type thing that is going to have a long story around it, it's going to have a plot line and the act structure and all the traditional things you're going to see in a story, that's where it goes into that romance territory, and that's where you're going to need a little more meat to it if it's going to be a good story of that variety. There are also stories where it's just the lust part, and that's a different panel that happens after midnight in a different hall.
We're getting a little...
Well, another thing is that actually this is
Go ahead.
this is something that actually ties in. I'm sure many of you have seen the movie Frozen, right? Yeah.
A couple people.
I see the reaction of the audience. You'll remember at the beginning of the movie, the two characters get all lovey-dovey eyed for each other, and they start singing a song about how great they are together, and then it turns out that one of them is a total jerk. And this is actually a potential source of conflict if you want to incorporate it into a story. But you have to realize that when you're dealing with this sort of thing, it's not enough to carry a story on its own. It is that 20 minutes at the end of the movie when they start saying to each other forever, and the rest of us kind of all roll our eyes a little bit. And if you look at it that way, I mean, it makes sense that it doesn't work as the basis for a story.
All right.
Last when we have questions, I can go through them in 2 minutes. This is my area of expertise.
Yes, you go
So
ahead.
I already mentioned that my claim to romance fame is Far From the Tree, which, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a story that ships at Bloom with an original character. It was written specifically for prom, so I knew I was doing something that is not typically accepted very well, and that's because shipping OCs with major canon characters is a big hang-up in romance stories that a lot of times doesn't go very well. So there's a lot of things we can say about how to specifically make an OC work with a canon character, but it essentially boils down to a very simple fact. People do not inherently hate shipping OCs with canon characters. They hate shipping bad OCs with canon characters. If you are designing a good original character that goes through all the stuff we've been talking about, who has the same levels of connections, who is a character in their own right that meshes with the canon character, it can work and it can be fine. The issue is when you have a character that does not cover all those bases, that isn't a good character in their own right, that you don't as a reader care about, then why do you care about the relationship and why does that work? There's no attachment to them that you can sense coming from the other character. There's no functionality in this relationship. And it essentially fails in the same category that a bad main six ship fails on. There's something in this that makes the reader go, hang on, this doesn't make sense. Or at the very least, it doesn't go far enough to let them suspend their disbelief if they, for whatever reason, just don't see this working at all. So I mean, it can happen like that with a main six ship. If you really, really, really want to put, pink horse and purple horse in the same room and make them kiss, I'm not really going to buy it automatically, but if you're writing the story, all right, fine, I can see it where you're coming from, I believe it, it's fine. Same logic applies to an OC story. If you can make it work, I will buy it. And I think I can speak for at least, like 5 of you. So I'll round up.
Yep. We want to take some questions real quick.
We'll speed round it here. So,
Yeah.
so if we could just limit it to one per person. I know a lot of people have multiple ones, but pick the good one.
All right, I've noticed in the last couple of years fan-fic has honestly been on the decline in favor of like things like Twilestia, Starlight, Star Trixie, things like that, and things that aren't, you know, they might involve a fan-fic, but it's not too many sixes. Why do you think that is? Also a seven. Write a Sombra X-Minuet fic and make it convincing.
I've actually noticed that too. I think that shipping tends to go in fads. Like really early in the fandom, Pinky Dash was the biggest one of the biggest ships. And there hasn't been there are barely any written of those anymore. I think that as a lot of the bigger plots for a ship are played out, then people move on to the next one, and I think that you still end up with a community of hardcore shippers for each of those. There's still plenty of main 6 shippers out there. There's still probably Pinky Dash shippers out there, but they end up. You don't see them as much. They're not the hot thing at this time.
Speaking of, what's everyone's favorite one true pairing? Just yell it out.
Very good.
All right, now stop shouting. Great.
Okay.
No real consensus. Shining Armor.
Shining Armor has a comic element to their romance, but the cakes have really done that. You have before they got together, dip cakes with so much room for Hana and marriage. And I haven't seen their shipping like those.
It is a very, I guess it's something that people don't have a lot of experience with, particularly this fam. I know we have a few people who have had those experiences with long-lasting marriage relationships, but in general, the fandom types a lot towards younger people in the 16 to, I would say, 25 age bracket. Maybe some of us have aged out at that point, but then since we have been around for a few years. But in general, that's the major audience that both are reading fanfics and writing them, I would say, in a lot of cases. So that's probably the biggest reason I would say that that's not focused on. It's probably as simple as people are just focusing on characters that look at least kind of close to their age.
That explains the Cakes and Rarity's parents, but not so much Cadence and Shining Armor, who probably should have gotten a lot more development in this, or at least some hints of this. I'm pretty sure if this had been season 1, they would have dropped at least some hints on it, that Twilight had a brother, or anything like that. But you're right, it's definitely a weak point, and I think the only people we can blame for that are the writers themselves, and the fact that I don't think Hasbro considered it worthwhile to investigate why Shining Armor and Cadence are together, just that they knew each other in the past, they fell in love, and they had a marketable baby.
Well, all right, that remains to be seen.
Okay. Next.
I've got the sales figures yet.
I just wanted to ask, what would your thoughts be on trying to ship either characters, like either an OC or an main character, with the princesses?
It very much depends on which character and which princess. I mean, everyone's unique. Shipping with Celestia or Luna is going to be very different from shipping with Twilight. I mean, Twilight's a young adult, whereas Celestia is 1,000 years older than pretty much anyone who isn't related to her or an immortal god of chaos. So it's going to be a very different experience for those different characters. The real pitfall, again, an OC, people don't intrinsically hate OCs. What they don't like are OCs who basically are transparently there for no reason other than to smash lips with another character. I mean, Flash Sentry is widely loathed in the fandom. There's many fans of it as well, but he had a very mixed reaction when he showed up. That's because he was basically the token male version of the token girl. We don't really see that much in male media, but it does show up sometimes in female media. And when you have a character who is transparently there, who, he plays the guitar, but, he's a nice guy, but what is there beyond that? People don't care.
And I also want to point out, if we're talking about shipping princesses, Cadence is married. So if you want to write a good homewrecker, go for it. But that's going to be a big issue.
There's always going to be a lot of headcanon involved in shipping the princesses too, because you have to decide, you know, how being an alicorn works and how their positions work, and so, right,
I'd say
exactly.
the bigger problem is that Celestia would have pre-existing relationships, or her subjects would have all grown up with her being the princess, you know, from the moment they were little. So there's, even if she had never interacted with someone else in her kingdom, they're going to have a kind of pre-existing relationship with her, just like we have a pre-existing relationship of sorts with our founding fathers. So you also have to cover that. Luna, that's not so much of a problem.
But I think the one sentence version I would put to that is, what does that character, OC or whatever, have to offer a princess? Because you know, you have to establish why this, you know, very wise, long-lived person would fall in love with him.
All right, I'm going to move on a little bit. Just to let everybody know, if you don't get your question answered, I think most of us, if not all of us, are going to be over at Close and Sofas, which is right down the hall over there. We will hang out for as long as we can, or at least until the bar run starts, one of the two. And we'll answer as many questions as we can. So.
You gestured earlier at like the kind of fuzzy border between friendship and romance. So, like, how would you determine like what's a romance and what's a friendship, and how do you?
Well, I usually don't get to second base with my friends.
Right, I was going to say, kissing is pretty much it. I mean, you know, you can be best friends and be romantically involved, but if you're best friends and you're kissing, then you're probably
I don't want to simplify it to
romantically.
something that's just its physical intimacy, but I'm having a hard time thinking of what else it would be that's the real differentiator.
That really, I mean, in my experience, you know, with real life relationships, then that's it, you know?
There you go.
There's some stories that even explore this, like Short Skirts to Explosions just recently wrote a story about this very topic. It was called Best Friends, is that what it was?
I would imagine.
Yeah.
That's really the code word for it.
All right, what's your question?
Hi, my question basically is, well, it kind of involves my story, but I'll just skip that part of it. Basically, how do you know if you're writing a romance too subtly?
That's just so it's not clear enough for the reader that they're interested in each other.
Well, yeah, kind of. Like, how do you know it's too, like, subtle, like, the reader won't understand that they actually are, like, gonna get together at some point?
Well, I think subtlety is not necessarily a bad thing to start off with that, but I think there is a point where I guess you might be too vague about it. There's a lot of ways you know, go through the will they, won't they phase of a relationship. But if you're not committing at some point, and if you're not clearly building towards something, I think that's the key difference. If the build-up is too slow, if there's not a significant progress between, like, okay, here they're sort of like wondering about it, and here they're kind of talking a little bit more deeply. Here they're kind of hanging out in close proximity, and okay, now we're kissing. There's a 4-step process there, and it's a clear sense of escalation where they're moving through that process. And if the first 3 steps of that are all that first thing where they're sort of just looking at each other weird, and then all of a sudden they shove everything else in the end, I think it's mostly a sense of pacing.
To be honest, I've actually had a lot of luck when it comes to, and this isn't a popular view, but I've had a lot of luck with characters actually talking to each other and telling each other, you know, how they're feeling and when they're confused about how they're feeling. And one of the reasons, and one of the things that you can do with that is that they can actually, you know, talk either to each other or to other characters about exactly, you know, trying to figure out exactly what, you know, exactly what that character is feeling. Because it's really important in those cases to make sure that you're keeping, that the character is talking to someone that they would talk to, that they're talking about it in the way that they would talk about it, and that they are thinking that they are feeling it for the reasons that they would think that they would feel it. But if you get all that, then they can just, you know, sit down with their one of their other best friends and say, I'm feeling really, I think that Rarity is really cute, and their best friends can say, Rainbow Dash, you shouldn't. Okay, sorry.
We probably have time for one more question.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Hi. So you covered the topic of how to make a ship convincing, with readers in the story. You need to get the reader to read the story first. Ships can be very polarized, and you have, I'm not going to read that ship, or it's OC and main six, I'm not going to read that. How do you convince non-believers to give you a chance?
Well, the unfortunate truth of that is a lot of times you can't. And it's one of the things that no writer ever wants to admit to themselves. There's a pretty significant chunk of audience that they're never going to reach. There are a lot of people who think that way about fan fiction. Like, there are people who will never read fan fiction, no matter how good it is. I've seen some of the best writing I've ever encountered in a fan fiction setting, but that doesn't mean I can send it to, a literary professor at university and say, this is some of the best writing I've ever seen, and inherently believe, okay, I'm going to ignore the fact that this is a ship fic about two colorful ponies, and go ahead and read this on the same level as they would, Walden or whatever the hell James Joyce wrote.
While that's
Ulysses and then the Winkins font, I believe.
While that's true, I have to say that building a reputation is the way to get people to read things they would not otherwise read. You have to put in the work to, write really quality stuff. You have to interact with the people who are going to recognize quality stuff and hope that someday they will see what you write, and and then once you are trusted, then when they know they can trust you, then they'll be more willing to look at things they wouldn't otherwise look at.
Or have a gimmick.
Yeah, but it also helps if you're writing a type of story, or you have a story hook or a story plot line that people are willing to take a chance on, even if it's starring a character that they don't like.
Yeah, I don't like Rarity X Blue Blood, but I love Platinum Crown.
Yeah, and same thing with, I remember a lot of the comments in Best Night Ever, which was before that, and it also was Blue Blood Rarity, was they hated Blue Blood coming in. And this was like season 2, early season 2. Everyone hated Blue Blood with like a burning passion because we had no other villains. And, but people still read it, and because they got word of mouth, or they saw it on ECD, or they just liked the idea of a Groundhog Day scenario, or anything like that. It drew them in, and so many comments were just like, I hate Blue Blood, but it's okay.
Just remember, it's not nepotism if you call it network.
Yeah. Well, it's old at this point, so I'm not sure how nepotistic it is. But it's a hook. What it is, and that's why we call it a hook. We want the reader to bite down, and then they'll be dragged kicking and screaming through the rest of the story, even if they hate Fluttershy, and then Fluttershy, prominent. So.
All right, thank you guys for coming, and
Thank you so much.